Hello and welcome to Listen.Up.People, a podcast of the USC Suzanne Dworak-Peck School of Social Work. I'm Dr. Eric Rice, Professor and Associate Dean for Research. Today we're going to talk about social work and sports. Awareness of the connection between physical and emotional health has grown in recent years. Sports can serve as a protective factor for at-risk populations from elementary school to professionals. Yet despite these benefits, elite collegiate athletes display higher risk of anxiety, depression, and suicidal ideation than their peers. My guests are part of a faculty group that collaborated to create a new course at USC that aims to demonstrate how the integration of social work and sports can promote well-being, inclusivity, personal growth, and foster positive change within individuals, community, and society. I'd like to welcome my two guests, Dr. Steve Hydon, teaching professor of practicum education and the director of social work in schools, and Dr. Aimee Odette, associate teaching professor. Both have extensive experience working with children in school settings, as well as personal passions for the role that sports and exercise can play in mental health and wellness. It's great to have you both here. I would love to start off with a question to get more into something personal before I dive into your new program and your new course, which is, okay, social work and sports is not necessarily two words that people put together too frequently. I guess, well, social work is two words itself, so three words people put together. So Aimee, I'll turn to you first and then I'll turn to Steve. How did you get involved in bringing social work and sports together?
Specifically for the course, Steve invited me to be a part of the development of it. But for me, I have been a student athlete for as long as I can remember. Elementary school, middle school, high school, up until college. So it was something that was very much a big part of my life. I also have three boys. They're not really boys anymore. They're young men who all spent time playing sports. And I have one who is a collegiate athlete right now. So I see the impact that sports can have on an individual. And I think that we as social workers have an amazing opportunity to have an impact on athletics.
Cool. So Steve, how did you get into this space?
Yeah, very similar. Thanks for the question, Eric, and good to see you both. And I too was a scholastic athlete. You could not keep me indoors. I was outside all the time, whether it was cross country running or track or soccer or hoops. It was just sort of a love of mine. And then for the last few years, been kind of moving into this space around athletics and sports and mental health and resilience and social work. I'm privileged enough to be on a university committee, the USAC committee, which looks at sort of faculty and staff and relationships with collegiate athletes, and that's been eye-opening for me. And then our former president of the university sort of launched these moonshots, and one of them was around sports and well-being and kind of that being an outward-facing type of program. And so I worked with some colleagues at our school, and we just started to think about, well, what is sports and social work? And this is not a new phenomenon. It's actually a space that's been out there nationally for many, many years. And so we thought, well, I think we're primed and positioned here in the heart of Los Angeles, which is a primary hub for sports, to sort of move into the direction of looking at wellness of athletes and their resilience and their mental health. And being a school of social work, we felt like we had a lot of expertise to lend to this discipline. So yeah, that's how I got into it, and I'm so glad I made that choice a few years ago.
That's great. It's great to hear that you both have this personal connection, not only as social workers, but also as having had history of being athletes. And Steve, one of the things you mentioned there at the end was the mental health and well-being and student athletes. And I think there's been some high-profile collegiate student athletes that have begun to speak openly about mental health struggles. And I guess the question here is, how is it that social work in particular might be able to help athletes to not suffer in silence?
Yeah, and I'm so glad, that we do have athletes that have come out publicly on what they've been experiencing. It kind of confirms the need and validates what we're trying to build here at the School of Social Work. I think because of the expertise we sort of have positioned ourselves to embrace those conditions that athletes face, whether it's mental health, whether it's substance abuse, performance anxiety, isolation, bullying, all these different sort of ways that athletes experience these conditions. And I think our role is to, as you suggested, sort of bring out their voice, highlight why there's a special attention specifically to athletes, that social workers can fulfill. A lot of the individuals, as we started to talk about this initiative, and whether it was with colleagues like Aimee and Professor Rafael Angulo, who was also instrumental in the development of the course, and many other colleagues. I also talked with external colleagues of mine across the country about they were once athletes, or they have, to Dr. Odette's point, they have children who are athletes. I've talked to school districts who have said, yeah, I've seen that in our school campuses. And so thank you for addressing this and bringing kind of some attention to this very needed area of practice. So yeah, I think that's one of the goals of ours, is to, again, allow athletes to feel comfortable expressing who they are and what they're going through, and how we can help them get through, their day-to-day sort of progress.
I think, and I don't want this to come out wrong or sound like I'm downplaying, a high profile athlete coming out and saying that, I've struggled with this, but there is a certain level of privilege to be able to do that. And I think that where we can absolutely have an impact are those local groups, the young kids within our communities, that they don't have the resources. The coaches don't know how to have that conversation with the kids. I spoke just a moment ago how I have a son he's playing collegiate baseball, and he is at a school that has a lot of resources. And he was excited. He said, Mom, we've got a mental health professional coming to talk to us at the beginning of fall ball. But the conversation was, hey, I'm here if you need anything.
Mm.
And that to me, I mean, it's great that they know that there's somebody there, but that doesn't help them have the conversation. And I think that's where this course and what we're doing can help people kind of get us integrated to help folks have the conversation.
That's such an interesting point. I think mental health and struggling with mental health is still this taboo topic for
Absolutely.
lots and lots and lots of communities. And are you envisioning this course and sports as a way of helping break down some of those barriers? Is this part of the mission as well, other than just reaching out to athletes who may be suffering, but also the power of sports as a vehicle to engage communities?
Well, so I can start here, and then Aimee, I'm sure will share. And that is, one of the things that Aimee said was, how do coaches talk with their athletes? And I think part of that is teaching language and vocabulary, and that experiencing some of these conditions is a very real thing. And we're not talking about sort of athletes who, yes, the elite and the privileged, but also athletes that are sort of hard to reach and hard to encourage to want to talk. Oftentimes, coaches are role models. Whether we want to believe that or not, they are. And so athletes look up to them, and they look to them to be sort of led in particular directions, or in particular sort of pathways. And so one of the assignments in the course, and I'm so excited that we're going to be talking about this, is that students have to actually interview a coach, and interview the coach, and what is their idea of mental health? How do you address mental health in your facilities, on your playgrounds, in your fields? And surprisingly, which is a really good thing, we've learned that there are coaches that have some awareness of these conditions. They believe in mental health. They believe in mindfulness engagement. They believe in open door policies. So they may not have the in-depth knowledge of, how to address mental health conditions the way a social worker would do. They certainly have an awareness that I think has come along over the last few years. And so there's almost this sort of, yep, I understand that this is something that we want to embrace. And I'm glad that I can work with a mental health or a school social worker, somebody who I can refer my athlete to. But yes, certainly encourage that. And it's not about toughen up and just, get through what you need to get through. Not at all. The conversations that our students have had with the coaches that they've identified have been pretty positive. And that was really refreshing to see in this.
That's great. Aimee, do you want to add to that?
I would like to add to that, please. We need to meet people where they're at. That is not a new concept in social work either. I mean, that's something that we teach, Social Work 101. Meet people where they are at. And so I think with social work and sports, it's meeting them on the playing field, meeting them in parks, meeting them at their dance class, meeting them in yoga, meeting them where they are naturally coming together as a community. I think that there is a misconception about who we are as a profession. I think today, if you still ask people, what does a social worker do? Aren't those the people that take kids out of people's homes and
Oh,
that kind of thing? So I think we have such an opportunity here to show our strengths as community organizers by being in our communities where folks are at. And so I think then that also takes some of that taboo away around, or the stereotype or the shame around mental health, mental wellness. So
but I love what you're saying here too, which is that it's also an opportunity for social workers to
yes,
do a little bit of, for lack of a better way of putting it, PR
yeah.
around what it is that we as social workers in our profession do. And have you been experiencing a positive reception in communities, or when you are approaching these sports teams and athletes as a social worker?
So I know that our students have, and to Amy's point, which
Mm.
is a great one, and that is, again, part of that assignment is to not only interview a coach, but to actually go to a park, recreational facility, a rec center, and observe. What do you see? How do you see people interacting? How do you see the community embracing sports? We do something that we call a windshield survey, where they literally go out in their cars, if they have one, okay, any mode of transportation, and they compare and contrast two different neighborhoods with two different recreational and park settings, and then they interview individuals that are in those neighborhoods. And
Mm.
again, overwhelmingly, the response has been positive. People have embraced individuals, they've shown support, they've said come back and let us know how this class has been moving for you. So that's really been wonderful. The other thing that's super exciting is that there's a National Alliance for Social Work in Sports, which has been around, I want to say, for about 10 to 15 years. I know it's a bit of a large window, but they're solely dedicated to this profession of sport and social work, and how our professional teams, so NBA teams, are required to have mental health staff. I've got a lot of individuals who have reached out to say, I'm a social worker for an NFL team. And so hockey teams, if you look at some of these sports where there is violence, there's unfortunately domestic violence, there's substance use, there's a need for this profession to be in these spaces and to bring attention to it, not in a shaming way, but more in a helpful approach. And that's what's really exciting about getting into this profession, that this is not something, again, like I mentioned earlier, it's not new. It's something that's going to be around for a while, and we're glad to be a part of it. Again, especially since we're at the heart of many huge events that are coming up with the World Cup and the Olympics and the Super Bowl and all these wonderful activities. Why not be involved?
Yeah.
How can you not get excited about
Well,
something?
and USC has a small reputation of being a decent place to be a student athlete. We've
Right.
got, so I think it's only appropriate that you all are starting a program where you're really bringing social work into an appropriate visibility as a helping profession around mental health and behavioral health issues, like like Steve and Aimee, you both have mentioned the good work that social workers can do in these communities. I want to turn a minute for our listeners to be able to hear a little bit more about this course that you've started. You've alluded to these cool assignments where you're sending students out into the community to really see where are people at, as Aimee pointed out. But can you talk a little bit about the process of creating this course? And really, I think the thing that's most exciting to me is what has the student reception been? I mean,
Yeah,
paraphrase
sure. I mean,
Steve.
so what happened was a few years ago, myself, Aimee, and I mentioned Raphael and Gulo a little bit earlier. We said, let's think about what a course in an elective would look like. And one of the first goals was to look at what's already being offered in other schools. So we're not
Mm.
replicating that, or maybe we're filling in some gaps. And so that was the first kind of mini lit review. And then we came together and we literally just sat down and said, okay, it's a 15 unit week, 15 unit course. Aimee, you take a few weeks, I'll take a few weeks, Raphael, you take a few weeks. But what's important to us? And we didn't want the course to focus on one particular athlete. We wanted to focus on the lifespan of an athlete. So
Hmm.
scholastic, collegiate, professional, older adults. We had a lot of fun building out this course, looking at women's rights, looking at mental health interventions, looking at substance use, looking at the mentality of an athlete. What happens when you're injured or sports is no longer part of your DNA? Then what happens? And how do you deal with some of that isolation and maybe even depression that might sit in? We look at the protective factors of sports and why could be a good thing that you're involved in sport activities. So we had a lot of fun also with like the titles. So like Friday Night Lights is a title. The Mamba Mentality is a title. There's No Crying in Baseball. That's one of the titles of the units. We're all familiar with that Tom Hanks movie. And so we just got a lot of fun with that. And I think that captured a lot of the interest from students. I literally said to students the very first class, which was the first time we taught this class was last spring. And the very first class again, so it would have been in January. And I said, why did you sign up for this course? Just be honest with me. And we actually had over enrollment, which was really exciting. And a good percentage of the students said, I was a student athlete and I experienced some of these conditions. And I didn't know that there was somebody out there I could talk to. Oftentimes it was a high school guidance counselor and they were great, but they didn't always provide what they would needed. And so students signed up to say, I just never thought about this marriage between sport and social work. So that just got me excited. A couple other students said it just sounded cool and there was nothing else left to take. I'm like, all right, that's cool. By the time our class was over, we had guest speakers, we had students engaged in debates, we had students engaged in hot topics, we had students create podcasts like this. We had students create motivational speeches. So they literally would set the stage and say, okay, I'm a coach in the middle of an auditorium and I'm getting all my guys ready or girls ready to kind of warm up and get ready to go out and play. So that was a lot of fun. The students gave each other feedback. So we really kind of did this flip design style of teaching where the students did all the activities and they shared and they enjoyed. And then they were able to kind of see wow, the breadth and depth of social work and sports. And in my last class, and I'll stop talking so I know Aimee has some thoughts. The very last class, I said, listen, you're going to get an evaluation and you're going to fill that out. And that's wonderful. I want to see that. But I'd like to solicit some of your feedback now so I can begin to jot down some ideas that we can think about moving forward. So overall, sort of how was this experience for you? And overwhelmingly, students loved the course. They loved the idea. You changed my whole paradigm and like shift in how I look at athletes and sports and why social work is so important. I started off the class not really knowing what to get, but I was, I was intrigued. And they left the class feeling much more empowered with how they look at this field. There are jobs out there that I forwarded to students, whether they're in athletic departments or sport facilities. And then we got some really good feedback about, hey, it would be great to actually have one class hybrid and go to a community center on like a Saturday. And let's actually see people who are doing this work. And I thought that was great. And then one of the areas, there was a couple other areas, and another one was on this whole changing landscape of name, image, and likeness. And how are we looking at students who are using that for whatever you believe in to their advantage. And so that was an area that I'm going to work on so that we can weave that into the conversation.
Keeping up with the very, very cutting edge of what's happening in student sports. Aimee, do you have anything you want to add about the design of the class?
Just quickly, when we first got together to do this, you have your ideas on, things that you think you want to have in the course or things that that you want to have in the course. I think what was amazing as we continue to talk was how many things we could have incorporated into the course that we even said, gosh, we could have a whole nother course filled, and just how the dynamic between sports and athletics can be such a wonderful, powerful, dynamic force in an athlete's or an individual's life, but how there is the flip side too. And how it can absolutely be a part of maybe even, leading down a path that a student didn't want to in terms of impacting their mental health in a negative way. So I think that we tried to touch on as many things as we could, and we didn't sugarcoat it.
Yeah, no, that's really powerful. Go ahead, Steve.
And I was going to know, I agree 100% with what Aimee's saying. The other thing is this. Word has gotten out. I literally just got an email this morning from someone at another institution who wants to meet with me to talk about, hey, I heard you've got this really cool sports course. We're thinking about something similar. would you mind meeting with me to talk about it? And I'm like, yeah, of course. Like, let's talk about it. I've shared the syllabus with other colleagues. So we're starting to get out there that people are aware that we're launching this initiative. And I mentioned earlier a little bit about the Alliance for Social Work in Sports. That is one of our next things. So they have an annual symposium. We've spent 3 years working with their board, and next year they're bringing the Alliance here to Los Angeles and USC for their annual symposium. So super excited to highlight and profile all the wonderful work that we're building in this area.
Is this something that is only available to social work students? I know the focus is on social work and sports, or is this something that is more broadly open to students at USC? I really don't know.
Broadly open to any student who is interested in taking the course. You could be a graduate student, and then there are some undergraduate students that are eligible to take graduate courses.
Okay.
We only launched it for the first time in the spring, so we had 19 of our current MSW students. But yes, it's open to anybody who's interested in taking the course. And that
did you see people from other departments or other schools that were trying to get in? I know you said you had an overflow.
I did see people from outside schools yet, but I have seen a few people who have reached out who aren't at USC.
I see.
Hey, can you tell me a little bit more about this course and kind of what you're doing over there? Is there an opportunity for me to do that? So we've had the interest, just have not enrolled yet some of those outside of our school students, but it's coming.
But the hope is to absolutely do that, though.
Yeah, it's coming. Yeah. It's coming. Yep.
That's great. That's great. Something that you said, Aimee, I want to touch back on for just a second, which was that you had said a lot of this course is focused on not sugarcoating the some of the issues around how student athletes may be encountering mental health issues or substance use issues. But I also know that there is a pretty robust dialogue, especially in work on school-age kids and adolescents, that really talks about the benefits of sports. And is this part of the course as well? And if so, how do you talk about social work's role in that?
Absolutely. I think that sports can be a tremendous positive influence. But go back to something that I said at the very beginning, is that we have to educate people. I think that just given my experience personally, given my kids' experiences, I don't think coaches, or they underestimate the impact that they have on their athletes, on their teams. And maybe it's something in the way that it's, well, this is the way that it's always done, or they have been doing their job for, so many decades. There is an opportunity to educate on many levels, because coaches, they are sometimes with our kids more hours than parents are, depending on what level of sport the athlete is at. I think also too, the parents need education on their impact with their student, with their athlete, the things that we say. It's a huge piece of it. So yes, we definitely talk about it as a protective factor, but I think there's a tremendous amount of education that needs to happen at various levels, depending on, what league. Is it a school league? Is it a travel league? Is it a collegiate league? There needs to be that dialogue so that we're on the same page in terms of, this isn't shameful to talk about your feelings, especially in certain sports.
Well, and I'm curious to ask a follow-up to that question, but I'm going to pitch it over to Steve for a second, which is that I would imagine some of these students who come into this, especially since you said a lot of them have backgrounds as athletes themselves, is their perspective on taking this class and engaging in this more from a college and high school and other athletic experiences were these great things, and I want to return to this, or has it been more of an experience of, this is a complex and nuanced space and I want to explore that more? I'm just curious kind of where the headspace of your students is with respect to this dynamics.
I would say it's probably leans a little bit towards the latter, like this complex relationship between sports and athletes, between marginalized groups, vulnerable groups. How are we building up courage, bravery, teamwork, leadership, compassion, all these wonderful elements that we talk about in social work all the time. And how are we then bringing that to the surface through the vehicle of athletics? Yes, do they want to find perhaps jobs in some of those other spaces that you mentioned? But I think it has been more about this complex dynamic between where do I fit in the role? Where's the role of social work? And why is there a need for social work specifically to be working with student athletes? I think that's primarily where our students so far have been landing in thinking through these concepts, these ideologies, the literature, the research, and again, these assignments. It's interesting to think about assignments. It's exciting, but they kind of are. You're outdoors and you're doing things outside and you're kind of navigating all those complex areas that you then bring back to the classroom conversation. So there isn't like a final, there isn't a 20-page paper. These are all more experiential types of activities that I think students have resonated with thus far.
That's great. It sounds way better than sitting in front of a Zoom screen or maybe even sitting in a basement classroom that I've certainly taught some MSW courses in without windows. Not that those classes haven't been fabulous. Trust me,
No, of course they were.
The windowless part is kind of rough sometimes. So being outdoors in spaces and where people are participating in sports sounds like a great experience for a student. Before we wrap up, I really want to give you each a chance to talk about if there's anything in this work that has been meaningful to you that you really want to share with our listeners. I think that this has been such a great and lively conversation. We have a time for just a little bit of a wrap up. So maybe I'll turn to Aimee first and then let Steve close it out. Is there anything that you would like our listeners to know about social work and sports in general that you haven't had a chance to talk about?
I think that initially some people might believe this is kind of an odd pairing or an oddball couple, but it really isn't. I was thinking about the course and I was thinking about, some of the interventions that we promote within schools, one of them being social and emotional learning. As I was thinking about that, I was thinking about what an athlete experiences when they're a part of a team. And it absolutely lines up. If you think about what, the five components of social emotional learning, self-awareness, learning who you are in your environment, in your community, with your teammates, being able to self-manage, right? So you don't get the red card and get chucked out of the game or whatever it is. Social awareness and relationship skills and responsible decision-making. So the marriage really is a beautiful marriage that works really well. And I've said this to Steve a million times. This is just the beginning.
Well, Steve, you want to take us home? You got some thoughts for us?
Well, I'll just say this, that not a 2 or 3 week window goes by where I don't get something via email from a colleague who says, here's an article, here's a story, here's a publication, here's a podcast. And that's, to Aimee's point, there's so much out there that we easily could begin to already start thinking about another course, a certificate in this area. That I think is our future direction. And then eventually, how can we start to tap into maybe some research and look at some funding for research in some of this particular area. And then one last thing is to have somewhat of a presence at the LA Olympics, which is in 3 years. And I think for us to have some type of platform or space or stage to sort of highlight and showcase this very much needed area, that's a personal goal of mine that I'm hoping to bring to fruition in a couple of years.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, thank you, Steve, and thank you, Aimee, for such a great conversation about such an interesting and potentially truly impactful line of work. And so to our listeners, if you want to learn more about social work and sports and the new course at USC, you can visit our school's website at dworak-peck.usc.edu. And if you have any questions for the guests or myself and the transformative research and programs that happen here at the USC Suzanne Dworak-Peck School of Social Work, you can email us at listen.up.people@usc.edu. And one more time, I just want to thank the two of you for giving me your time and giving the passion and energy to our students and our communities through this work. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Dr. Rice.